Hello everyone and welcome to Database Security Office Hours for February 2019. Our topic this month is Unified Audit. Just a reminder that this call is being recorded and the recordings for this and previous AskTOM sessions are available on the AskTOM website. Just click All Sessions to view previous month's recordings. Office hours are intended to give you a direct line into your database security product development team. We start each office hour session with announcements, followed by a presentation on some technical topic, and we then finish up with an open line for any questions you might have. Feel free to enter questions into chat at any time, and we'll get to those during the Q&A segment at the latter part of office hours. Let's start with this month's announcement. Today's February 14th. In a lot of places in the world, Valentine's Day is being celebrated, so don't forget to do something nice for your significant other today. And if this isn't a good day for Valentine's Day, don't forget this is also the anniversary of the date the telephone was patented. So when someone calls you, try answering the phone with happy anniversary. It'll make someone's day. Big announcement for this month is the release of Database 19C. Database 19C is a long-term release. It'll be supported through 2026. We had it out last month, towards the end of last month, on Live SQL. That was coincident with Oracle Open World in London. And yesterday we released Database 19C for engineered systems, specifically for Exadata. We'll have the cloud and on-premises release later this year, due early this year, and we hope to have all platforms out before summer. There's some significant new security features in this release. Two of those revolve around Database Vault. There's Database Vault Operations Control and some changes to Database Vault Simulation Mode. We'll be talking about those in next month's AskTOM session. We've also made a change to the default schemas for the database. You may remember that in 18C we introduced the feature of a schema-only user. This is a user that has no password assigned and therefore could never log in. In 19C, we are using that feature for our default accounts. So all of the preceded accounts, with the exception of sys, will automatically be set up to have no password and be schema only. We've made a minor change to syslog support for Unified Audit, and we'll talk a little bit more about that during today's presentation. Next announcement is for Audit Vault and Database Firewall. We're getting ready to release Bundle Patch 10. You can look for that over the next couple of weeks. Keep in mind that Bundle Patch 9 is a new baseline. What that means is if you're on a patch release prior to Bundle Patch 9, you can't go directly to 10. So if you're in Bundle Patch 8, you would have to upgrade. You would have to apply Bundle Patch 9, and then you could apply Bundle Patch 10. Within Bundle Patch 10, we've upgraded target version support for SQL Server and Linux. We've also expanded our host monitor support for AIX, Windows, and Solaris on x64. Just in time for the 19C launch, we have added in a new capability into the Oracle Development Gym at https://devgym.oracle.com. We've given you some new security feature quizzes for 12C, 18C, and now 19C. It's a great chance to test your knowledge of database security and to see how you stack up against your peers. Also new is apex.oracle.com/database-features. This is a nice way to check version by version what features are available and get a feel for, if I move from 12.1 to 19C, what new things can I expect to have access to? In the support corner this month, I want to talk a little bit about service request data collection. There's a series of MOS notes that start with titles like SRDC for transparent data encryption. And what SR data collection is used for is to document the diagnostic information that is required to effectively troubleshoot issues for a particular piece of technology. And by giving you this information up front, what types of data we're going to need from you, our goal is to try and get you to upload that data to the SR early in the SR process, hopefully before an analyst even looks at it. And what that'll do is it'll reduce the back and forth between you opening the SR and the support analyst telling you, well, I need this file and that file. So it makes things a little bit cleaner. It'll improve the quality of the initial support response time and hopefully get you to a resolution quicker by using the SRDC notes. Let's go ahead and move to this month's technical session, and we're going to focus on Unified Audit. And as we look at Unified Audit, we first want to think about why we audit. And there's really three reasons why people are likely to audit. One of them is because someone's telling them to do so. There's a regulation or a law that requires for this particular type of data that you keep track of who's accessed it or who's changed it. And those laws often tell you how long you have to retain that information for. So we see a lot of audit driven from a regulatory compliance standpoint. Another common reason for auditing is to support forensic analysis. After something bad happens, I want to go back and look through the logs of what happened to try and figure out what was done, who did it, when did they do it, what exactly did they do, what did they see. So supporting forensic analysis. And a great use of audit is for anomaly detection. Keep in mind that although we tend to talk a little bit about audit from a security standpoint, because this is the database security call, audit has operational implications as well, because you get a lot of information about what's working, what's not working. You may be able to detect, for example, application servers that have wrong passwords. There's a good reasons to audit outside of security. But within security, let's take a look at anomaly detection. You know, the industry standard or the industry expectation is that once your network is breached, once an attacker is inside your network and they begin to target your servers, the typical time it takes to breach a server is minutes, not hours, not days. Most servers are breached within minutes of someone beginning their attack. And in most cases, the time to discover the breach is months. In fact, the 2018 Ponemon survey on data breaches reports that the average time to discover a breach is 197 days, so a little over 6 months. Now, during the time between compromise and discovery, an attacker is exfiltrating. In other words, they're pulling data out of your database, they're packaging that data up, and they're shifting it through your network out to wherever they can collect it up. And so one goal of auditing is to assist in anomaly detection, assist in that discovery phase, so you can shrink the gap between compromise and discovery, which shrinks the time that an attacker has to exfiltrate data, which in turn shrinks the amount of damage that they've done to you. All right. So this is why auditing is important. Now let's take a look at where auditing was through the Oracle 11G release. Now we first started with auditing back in Oracle Release 7, 1992, long time ago. And auditing has evolved over all that time to get to where it was at the 11G R2 phase. Now, there's many types of auditing. For example, there's mandatory auditing that we've had for a very long time. And mandatory auditing or default auditing are those events that are always audited and can't be disabled. For example, if you start a database up, that produces an audit record. If you shut it down, that produces an audit record. If you connect to the database using administrative privileges, sysdba, sysopper, that produces an audit record. And those audit records get written to the operating system. If you're on Windows, they get written to the event log. If you're on Unix or Linux, they get written to Oracle Base Admin Oracle SID ADUMP or Oracle Home RDBMS Audit. The Oracle Home RDBMS Audit is if you don't have a dump set, or if you're doing startup, because at startup the P file hasn't been read yet. Okay, so that's mandatory auditing. We enhanced mandatory auditing. We added some features to mandatory auditing around the 10G timeframe when we came out with a new parameter called Audit Sys Operations. And Audit Sys Operations extended mandatory auditing of privileged administrative privileges to capture all top-level SQL statements issued by a sysdba or sysopper. So not just the fact that they had logged in, but you get an actual record of what they did. This was such a popular feature and so valuable that we changed the default value of audit sys operations to true in 12.1. So it's been around for quite a while. In addition to mandatory auditing and administrative privilege auditing, we have standard database auditing. This has been around for a very long time, although there's been minor changes over the years. And this is where we do things like saying audit create session when not successful, audit select on the HR employees table. And you can use standard auditing at the statement level, you can use it at the privilege level, or you can use it at the object level. I want to audit everything a user does. I want to audit everybody who uses the select any table privilege, or I want to audit everything that was done to the employees table. For storing those standard auditing records, you have three choices. They can go into the database. The sys schema has a table called odd $. They can go out into the operating system as an XML file, and you control the location of that XML file with your audit file destination parameter. Or they can go into the system log, either syslog for Unix and Linux or the OS event log for Windows. Your storage location is determined by the parameter audit trail. Okay? Standard auditing can be conditional, but the conditions are very limited. You have narrow boundaries that you can handle. Initially, when we came out with standard auditing, you could do by session or by access. And although the syntax is still there, they effectively are the same in anything past 10G. You can do, I want to audit when something is successful, or I want to audit whenever it's not successful, or I can audit it always. So you have some condition cases there. And you can audit if a target is accessed by a specific user. Audit conditions can be combined. So I can audit whenever not successful by a specific user if I want to. But those are about the only conditions you can build in. Now, what should you typically audit? You'll usually want to audit things like DDL commands. You'll probably try and avoid certain commands like select because they tend to generate a lot of auditing. But you can audit almost anything with standard auditing. Okay? The audit records themselves contain things like who's the OS user, what's the database user, if you're using client identifier, what is that, what session were you at, what terminal were you at, what did you access, was it a table, was it a row, what did you do, create, update, delete, execute, when did you do it, and did it succeed or not. That's the standard record. We introduced in Oracle 10GR2 the concept of extended attributes for auditing. And extended attributes mean in addition to the stuff you see on the left, we also capture the full SQL text and any bind variables that were used. Standard auditing, because it does write audit information to an audit trail, does have some performance implications, but in general those are low. And the secret to getting the best performance out of standard auditing is to choose the right place to write to. We'll talk more about that in just a second. And to choose the right things to capture. You don't usually want to audit everything. You want to audit only the things that are relevant from a security standpoint. So if you're auditing failed logins when not successful, most databases have very few failed logins. If you're auditing DDL, drop table, create table, that's generally fairly rare in most databases. If you're auditing create user or alter user, again, fairly rare. So select your audit targets to be only the things that are relevant from a security standpoint. Performance-wise, what you can expect to see, depending upon how you set your audit trail to, is from as low as 1.4% to as high as about 12% degradation. The sweet spot for this for many years was to write your audit trail to XML and use XML extended. That was about 3.2%, as you can see here, and that was a reasonable amount of overhead for most people to live with, and it gave you very good quality audit information. There's other types of auditing you can do. For example, there's value-based auditing. Value-based auditing goes beyond what you see in standard auditing and tells you what specific records were changed and what values were changed and what were they changed from and to. And this type of auditing is done either through triggers, which is how we did it for many years, or once we had introduced log miner through the mining of redo transaction logs. From a trigger standpoint, you might use something that looks a little bit like this. I want to collect old and new values when something is updated or changed. From a log mining standpoint, you might see something like this. This column was changed from one value to another value. Another type of auditing is fine-grained auditing. Fine-grained auditing extends standard auditing, and it allows you to audit conditional based upon columns. I can choose to audit only if a specific column is accessed. I can even choose to audit only if a specific value within a column is accessed. And so fine-grained auditing gives me a lot more capability to fine-tune what I'm going to capture in my audit trail. Now, if we look back over all these types of auditings, and these are just a few of them, they get written to different places. Standard audit gets written to the audit trail, database audit trail, $. Fine-grained auditing to a different table within the database. If you're using XML, then standard audit and fine-grained audit get written out to audit file destination. If you've got audit sys operations set to true and haven't turned on syslog auditing, then sys operations get sent to the audit file destination. When you start a database up, that goes to Oracle Home RDBMS Audit. If you're using Database Vault, that goes to DVSys Audit Trail. If you're using Windows, the audit record goes to the event log. There's a lot of different variations there. And basically, as we're coming to the end of 11GR2, we were in a situation where to truly understand what you could do with audit, where all the audit information was located, and how to manage that audit required a lot of skill. It required a lot of knowledge. Okay? How did we get in that position? Well, it's because auditing was developed over decades. We first came out with the capability to do standard auditing in Oracle 7, which was released in '92, but obviously we'd been developing for quite a while behind that. We enhanced that in 9i Release 2 with streams and log miner. We enhanced that in 10GR1 with fine-grained auditing. We enhanced that in 10GR2 with extended audit and the XML audit trail. And so what we had was we had decades of development, all very good intention, all very valuable features, but all implemented just a little bit differently. So as we were moving forward into the 12C era, as we were developing for 12C, we wanted a way to do things better. And what the development team is, they looked at audit and said, you know, if we could start over, if we could take what we've learned with over 30 years of development experience here and write our audit facility from scratch, what would we do? And that is exactly what we did in 12C. We introduced Unified Auditing, which took 30 years of technical debt, wiped that out, and we started over from scratch. We had some goals for Unified Auditing. One of them is in the name. We wanted to unify all those different audit trails and put all of the audit information in a single location. We wanted to make that audit trail more secure, more tamper-proof. We wanted to reduce the management burden of auditing. We wanted to better control space usage, and we wanted to make it easier for you to set up policies that made sense. We always want to improve performance, so we took the opportunity to make some tweaks to improve performance along the way, and we wanted to improve your level of control so that you could make your auditing more selective and only capture what was needed. Let's look at each of these goals and see what we did. In terms of unifying the various audit trails, we now write the audit trail to the odd $ unified table in the AudSys schema. So audit now has its own schema. It has a table that is separate from everything else, and we put all audit in there. Database vault, label security, data pump, standard, everything goes into the unified audit trail. We give you one data dictionary view to look at your unified audit trail. The Unified Audit Trail Data Dictionary View, very easily named. From a security standpoint, as I mentioned, Audit Trail now belongs to a user called AudSys, and AudSys can't log in. You can't even make AudSys log in. You can see here on the right, I went through and said, well, what if I grant him session? No. What if I grant him DBA? What if I do this? You cannot log in as AudSys. You also can't use DML commands to modify the audit trail. I can't truncate the audit table. I can't delete a record from it. I can't update a record from it. Any management of the audit trail has to be done using the PL SQL package DBMS Audit Management, which means that we have much tighter control over what can be done. Because AudSys owns the audit trail, and AudSys's default table space is sysaux, that's where we put that audit trail by default, we also give you the capability to move that audit table out of sysaux and put it into its own dedicated table space, which if desired can be encrypted with transparent data encryption. We've given you a couple of new roles to help with securing that audit trail. One of them is the audit admin role. This is the user who has permissions to create and modify unified audit procedures. The other is the audit viewer role. The audit viewer role can't do anything but view the audit trail. They can't change any policies. So with Unified Audit, we've gotten very close to the goal of an immutable audit trail, an audit trail that you can truly trust not to have been altered by a malicious user. From a manageability statement, I'd mentioned that audit records are written by default to sysaux, not systems, so that's good. We're not going to fill up the table space and cause things to break. But we also give you the capability, and we in fact recommend that you use that capability to move that audit table outside of the sysaux table space into its own. You'll do that with the set audit trail location procedure in DBMS Audit Management. In cases where you're using Data Guard, if you have a logical standby, prior to Unified Auditing, you had to do work to ensure that you could still audit within your logical standby, because those are open read-only. You can't write to aud $, or FGA log $, or DVSys. You have to write outside the database. With Unified Audit, you don't have to even think about this. We automatically detect if a database is not open in read-write mode, and if it's in read-only mode, we send audit records to a binary file, .bin, located in Oracle Base Audit, Oracle SID. And those files are written to that bin file, and then they're viewable through the Unified Audit view, but you don't have to worry about changing your audit parameters just because you've created a logical standby or because you open a database in read-only mode. We give you the capability to manage your audit trail. You can archive audit, you can purge audit, you can create automatic purge jobs. So if you have a fixed data retention requirement, you can do something like go out every week and delete everything that's older than my retention interval. And those purge jobs are multi-tenant aware. So I can either do it at the PDB level, or if I want to, I can handle everything at the CDB level. Okay? In terms of what you're going to audit, we still have mandatory auditing, and the mandatory auditing still captures anything done by an administrative user. SYS, SysDBA, SysOp, or SysKM. These are going to be audited by default, and that information shows up in the Unified Audit Trail, not somewhere else that you have to remember to go look for it. We also audit, by default, you can't change this, any changes to the audit status. If you create or alter an audit policy, we put that in the audit trail. If you issue an audit or no audit statement, if you change your fine-grained auditing, if you can make a configuration change to Database Vault, all of these are captured. All of these are put into the Unified Audit Trail. Additionally, we give you some pre-configured audit policies, so you don't have to always try and create your own. 2 of these we turn on by default. One of those is Aura login failures. You almost always want to capture create session when not successful, and that's what Aura login failures does. If someone fails a login, that's a security event. We also give you Aura Secure Config, which basically is looking at DDL statements. If someone issues a DDL statement, or most DDL statements, we'll capture that in the Aura Secure Config audit policy. But we give you a lot more that you can draw from and use the ones we've given you or change them. If you want to capture parameter changes, we give you Aura Database Parameter. If you want to capture changes to users, create user, delete user, alter user, Aura Account Management. If you're following the CIS benchmark recommendations for Oracle, those have clearly defined recommendations on what should be auditing. We have a pre-built policy that tracks the CIS recommendations. Using RAS, there's a policy for that. Using Database Vault, there's a policy for that. And we show you what those policies are in the Audit Unified Policies view. That'll show you all the policies and what's audited by the policies. And we let you see which ones are enabled in Audit Unified Enabled Policies. Okay? From a performance standpoint, we're always trying to improve performance. And one of our goals was to make sure that we kept performance within the boundaries that we saw for standard auditing while still giving you all the benefits that we're talking about. For 19C, we're clocking in at between 2.2 and 3.3% overhead for standard auditing, and that's tested all the way up to 324,000 audit records per hour, which that's a good amount of auditing. Keep in mind, these are preliminary numbers. 19C just went production yesterday. We will be updating these numbers over the next few months. We're going to wait until we get the Linux on-premises release and benchmark against that to test it. But you can see from back in 12CR2 all the way up through 19C, we have very good performance, relatively low overhead for unified auditing. Remember, the best way to improve performance is not to do the work in the first place. And so we've given you better capability to only audit what is required. We're much more selective with unified audit policies than you could be with standard audit policies. Things like I want to create an audit policy that only captures audit if someone is not using the application program from the application server as the application user. Okay? Things like I only want to capture audit if someone's doing something with data pump or with RMAN or with a direct path load. We have component-based auditing. You can audit based on role memberships. If I have a privileged user or a power user role, I can say I want to capture everything done by those privileged users. We'll talk about top-level auditing in a few minutes when we talk about what's new in 19C. We can do exception-based auditing. I want to audit everything except the application. Okay? So all of these are ways to filter what you're auditing to only what's required. The audit trail with unified auditing is extensible. Okay? So there are application namespaces that are default, for example, user ENV, and sometimes you want to record what's in user ENV in your audit trail. Prior to unified auditing, you really only had two ways to do that. There is an audit feature called Client Identifier, which gives you a little holding place where you can put information into. It was really designed for applications like SAP or eBusiness Suite to pass the end user identity through the application down into the database, but you could use it for other things. So it wasn't unusual to write a login trigger to populate Client Identifier with other information if you wanted to. In Unified Audit, you don't have to go through that step. You can actually say, I want to go into the user ENV namespace and I want to capture the authenticated identity attribute and the network protocol attribute. If you were using enterprise user security, that populates sysLDAP user default with information from the netorg person object class. You can have your audit trail include that. If you're using Application Express, that populates things like the application user and workspace ID. You can include that in your audit trail. If you're running on eBusiness Suite, maybe you want your audit trail to include the form that an action was performed, what eBusiness Suite action they did, what responsibility was active. You can do that. And you're not limited to the application context that we provide for you. If you have your own application or you want to do custom work with application context, Unified Audit will work with that. Switching to Unified Audit, easy as can be. If you're in 12C, you're using Unified Auditing whether you've looked at it or not, because the default mode is mixed with both Unified and Standard Auditing enabled. If you're ready to switch to pure Unified Audit mode, you're going to have to relink your databases, and this is true all the way through 19C. You're going to have to relink your databases and use a flag UNIAUD_on. Once you do that, you can start back up, and you're now in pure Unified Audit mode, and Standard Auditing won't work anymore. We do expect people to gradually move away from standard auditing, and we're hoping that's happening fairly quickly. It appears to be from surveys of the customer base, and our plan is at some point to deprecate and then obsolete Unify, our standard auditing. There's some version-specific nuances with Unified Auditing that I want to run over with you. Let's start with the very beginning. When we first released Unified Auditing, this is version 12.1, in fact 12.101, we had taken an architectural approach that allowed for either queued writes of audit information or immediate writes of audit information. And back in 12.1, we defaulted to queued. And what that meant was that when an audit event occurred, that audit event was placed into a queue in memory, a little shared memory area, and that shared memory area would flush down to a secure file lob. And that flush happened either every 3 seconds or when the audit queue got to 85% full, whichever happened first. You had control of that audit queue size, so you could change that, but it would never be more than 3 seconds. And then periodically, those secure file lobs would be imported into the Unified Audit Trail. The problem with that architecture was if the database crashed, graceful shutdown wasn't a problem, but if someone killed PMON or the server itself crashed or someone did a shutdown abort, then those queues are lost. They're not flushed gracefully, which means that you had the potential to lose up to 3 seconds of audit information. For some customers, that risk was fine. They cared more about performance and ensuring that things were, that they had the majority of audit information and didn't care if they lost 1 or 2. But for most customers, an audit trail has to be complete. You can't really have an audit trail if you're going to lose records. And so in 12.102, we changed our default mode from queued to immediate, which means that you had to manually go in or explicitly go in and say you wanted to use this better performing but more risk of losing data mode of auditing. In 12.102, we also introduced that CIS benchmark recommendations for audit and the database vault default audit policy that I'd mentioned a little bit earlier. But this is what was done in the 12.1 time frame. As we move forward to 12.2, we remove that audit queue from the SGA, and there's no longer a write to an audit queue which flushes to secure file lobs, which then goes into the Unified Audit Table. Instead, we streamline the write to the Unified Audit Table, and we write directly to that. So there is no longer this choice between queued and immediate. You'll see the syntax is still supported in audit policies, but there's no difference in the background between what happens there. We also gave you the ability to audit based upon role membership. That was new in 12.2. We gave you a small change to the RAS policy. There were a few privileges that we wanted to include when someone grants system privileges or revoke privileges. So those now show up in the RAS policy. And we improved our unified audit integration with VPD so that if you're using VPD, VPD predicates now will be captured in the audit trail. All of that was done in 12.2. Roll forward to 18C. We enhance auditing a little bit more. We've added a new option in 18C to write the Unified Audit Trail out to syslog. And if you choose to take advantage of that, you would do it with the Unified Audit System log init.aura parameter. And you got to keep in mind, we don't control syslog, we don't control the Windows event log. There's only so much data that those constructs are able to take. So you can't put all of the data that we capture with the database-based Unified Audit Trail into syslog or the event log. There's a subset of those columns that go into that audit trail. You also lose the ability to extend it because there's no place within the syslog construct to put those extensible attributes. But for those customers who wanted to write their audit trail to syslog, they now have that capability. We also gave you the ability to export the Unified Audit Trail using Data Pump. So if you wanted to archive audit data off, you can do that, and you can bring it back into the audit trail later on if you want to. Roll forward to yesterday when we released 19C. We now give you the capability to audit only top-level SQL statements. And what this does is it filters out recursive or indirect SQL. I'm going to give you an example of this. Suppose I say to audit select on a bunch of tables. If I collect statistics on those tables, well, that's doing a select in the background. And what would happen is I would gather schema statistics, and that top-level command would generate hundreds or thousands of indirect commands on behalf of it. Sometimes that's what you want. In fact, most of the time that's what you want, which is why our default is still to capture recursive and indirect SQL. But sometimes all you want to know is, what did the user type in? That's good enough. Now you have a choice to capture that, and that choice is exercised at the audit policy level. So I can do top level only for certain statements or even for certain users, and I can do all SQL for other users if I want to. We also made a change to the Unified Audit table. We partition based upon event timestamp. We do date range partitioning based upon that, but we now expose that with a new column in the table called event timestamp UTC. And what that means is if you're selecting against that Unified Audit table, as long as you include event timestamp UTC in your where clause, you'll be able to take advantage of partition pruning. And we made a minor change. I'd mentioned this up at the start when we were talking about new things in 19C, to our writing of audit logs out to syslog or to the event log. Remember I said that's only a subset of the information that goes into those audit trails? Well, we expanded that subset to include the PDB GUID in 19C, which kind of makes sense. If something's happening in a PDB, you want to know exactly which PDB it occurred in. So that's what's happened in 19C. We're not done. We continue to develop unified auditing. You'll see changes in 20C, 21C. This will continue on for a long time. What we're working on right now is a utility that you can run that will convert your existing standard audit policy into a unified audit policy. And our goal with this is to make it easier for you to migrate away from standard auditing and into unified audit. As soon as we have this done, which should be sometime this year, we'll make this available to you via My Oracle support, and we encourage everyone, take a look at unified auditing. If it meets your needs, please consider migrating to get off of standard auditing. Some best practices for unified auditing. I think the first one is around read performance. Keep in mind that odd $ unified table, it's a table. And that means that it has data, it has partitions, and the quality of the execution plan for a query against that table is really determined by the statistics on the table. So periodically collect statistics on your unified audit table. I'd mentioned that when we don't have the database open, if it is shut down, if it crashes, if it's open in read-only mode, we write audit records out to operating system spillover files, binary files. You want to periodically move that data from those files back into the database, because the Unified Audit Trail view looks at both the Unified Audit table and those files. And you don't want to join to things that are outside the database to external tables if you can avoid it, because that's going to impact performance. Remember I'd mentioned we give you the capability to size your audit trail, controlling it with periodic archiving and purging. So do that so you shrink the size of that table. And wherever possible, if you're in 19C or up, take advantage of that new feature we introduced with the event timestamp UTC so that you get partition pruning when you're selecting against the audit trail. This is going to be important for things like Audit Vault and Database Firewall, which are periodically going out and harvesting audit information from the audit trail to move it into another repository. From a write performance standpoint, your biggest friend is watching what you audit. Target the things that you need to audit. If somebody comes to you and says, I want to audit everything that happens in the database, your first question back should be, do we really need to audit this, or could we perhaps monitor this with something like Audit Vault and Firewall, where the monitoring work is done off of the database server and there's no performance impact? So be selective in what you audit. Okay? Do move the Unified Audit table to its own tablespace. Don't leave it in sysaux. It gives you better management of your audit data. It also reduces the impact of other objects on that sysaux tablespace. So that's it. What you should have taken away from this is that unified auditing gives you better security, better manageability of your audit trail, better flexibility in what you audit, and better performance from your auditing. Each new database version improves Unified Audit. We intend for this at some point to replace standard auditing. With that, I want to thank you, let you know that the next office hours will be on Thursday, the 14th of March, and our topic is going to be Database Vault. And with that, we'll open it up for Q&A. Do keep in mind that you're not limited to Unified Audit. Any security topic is fair game, but also remember it's an open forum. Your competition could hear what you ask. So if you'd like to ask a private question, feel free to email me.
Oh, Joseph asked a good one. We are using fine-grained auditing now. How do we move to Unified Audit? Joseph, fine-grained auditing is part of Unified Audit. So when you move to Unified Audit, your FGA records will be written to the Unified Audit trail. If you want to switch your FGA policies to Unified Audit, it's going to depend on what your policy is doing. A lot of people were using fine-grained audit to get better conditions. I wanted to audit only certain based on IP addresses or users. If you're doing that, you can probably use the conditional auditing in Unified Audit and switch over to a standard audit policy. Some people are using fine-grained auditing to collect column-type conditions. I only want to audit if someone hits this one individual column, or if this column is a certain value. Those types of capabilities aren't in Unified Audit yet, so you'll continue to use DBMS FGA to write those policies, but in pure Unified Audit mode, that will be written out to the Unified Audit trail. Good question. And glad to see you moving from 10G, but hate to see you moving to 12C. Joseph, how about coming to 18C or 19C? Not part of SOL. All right, fair enough. Fair enough. Now, Joseph says he can't move to 19C. It's not part of their engineering yet. And 19C is pretty new. It was just released yesterday for Exadata, so obviously people can't go to it right away. I think, Angelin, I know you're on. Angelin, do you know if the migration scripts you guys are working on are going to include FGA policies, or is that going to be manual?
That's going to be manual. FGA policies are not included as part of the migration because, as you said, there could be like specific use cases for which it is written. Yeah, if that's kind of a requirement from a larger forum, maybe we could start addressing that too.
Probably not for the migration, but maybe for, as I said, we're actively developing Unified Audit. It's getting better each time. So there may come a point where we move some more of the column-specific capabilities into Unified Audit, but I don't see that happening even as far out as 21C. So we'll have FGA around for a while.
Okay.
Thanks, Angela. Within the AskTOM framework, you can go in and put in a question, and I'll see that and try and answer in advance. Although the question was, can you recommend best practices for keeping passwords hidden in command lines for import and export using data pump, shell scripts, things like that? And my answer was, and I'll send this to you in email, or I'll try again in email, is that the best way to do this is to not use a password at all. My preference, if I can run something locally on the same server as the database, is I'll use an OS authenticated account, an $$ account. which allows me to make a bequeath connection to the database, not requiring a username and password. If I do need to run something remotely, or if I can't use an ops $sign account, then I'll do this using Secure External Password Store. And I'd sent you, or thought I had sent you, a link to a white paper on how to do it using Secure External Password Store. So those are inside the Oracle technology stack. Outside of the Oracle technology stack, I see a lot of people using privileged account management tools, and we're starting to see those kind of morph into more online tools rather than the old traditional password safe. And so if you're using something like a CyberArk, there's APIs where you can pull usernames and passwords from CyberArk, and you can build workflow around that. Frank asked the question, what is a Secure External Password Store? Frank, what it basically is an Oracle wallet, an encrypted file store, and you can link a set of credentials, a username and password, to a TNS alias. And so with Secure External Password Store, if I say to connect / at, and then give it an alias, okay, you're familiar with that, good, okay. But there's a white paper on how to do that. The reason that's not my first choice is if somebody gets onto the server and steals that wallet, you're only as protected as the strength of the password for that wallet. So it's much better to have no password at all if you can, and do the activity locally with an ops $sign account. But sometimes that's not possible. No, not external. Yes, my first choice is external user. My first choice is a user who is identified by the operating system. My pleasure. That was a good question, by the way. And thank you so much, Frank, for putting in your email into the AskTOM site. Of the questions I get where people go through and use that Q&A section within AskTOM, I think only 2 of them have they remembered to put in their email. So people will ask the question, I never get an email, and then I have no way to answer it. Let's see, Shandon asked, every night we run EO, the end of day batches. We usually disable auditing during that time period. What is your recommendation to audit batch jobs with the same performance? So instead of disabling auditing, my preference would be to use Unified Audit and write an exception to not audit that particular process. If you don't need to audit that, then just leave it out of your audit trail. But by disabling auditing, if your database is still open for other people to do stuff with, you give them a hole when, if they know you're disabling auditing, the bad guys can come in and do things and you won't have anything in your audit trail. So when we were talking about unified auditing, I said one of the capabilities is exception-based auditing. You can say audit everything except the batch job. Jim says it'd be nice to have unified audit in its own table space from the beginning of DB Create. You know, Jim, we looked at that and we sort of compromised there. We don't like having a lot of default table spaces that have to be created because it complicates the database creation process. And some people, some customers are not at a level where they really have DBAs to manage this stuff. So the compromise we came up with is at least we moved the audit table outside of the system table space. It's into SysAux, and then we make it pretty easy to move it into its own table space. Sven says, isn't there a risk to log all failed logon attempts, like it could be used during a DDoS attack to slow down the system, potentially run out of disk space? Sven, if you have someone that is pounding your database that hard, you really want to know about it. Because whether you're auditing or not, if I'm doing a DDoS attack against you and I'm hitting your listener with that many failed login attempts, I'm already impacting performance. Let's put it into the audit trail so we can see where they're coming from, and so we can hopefully feed that audit trail into something like an audit vault or a security monitoring analytics service so that we go out and take positive action on that. See, and there's one more. If I recall correctly, there's a couple of parameters to help with DOS attacks. There are. You can there's SQLnet.org parameters that will help with so many failed logins, with bad pings that come in or bad packets that come in. There's absolutely things around that. Pat says, are there any plans to create on-premises GUI tools for managing audit and looking at audit records? Pat, we've already got one, Audit Vault and Database Firewall. That is our tool for managing audit and looking at audit records and managing the audit policies. We're enhancing Audit Vault and Firewall, by the way. This will come out later this year to where it works better with Unified Audit and gives you better control of those Unified Audit policies. Jim says the command to move the Unified Audit table to another table space does not seem to be instant. Oh no, the Unified Audit table can get quite large. So the larger it is, the more time it's going to take. But it should be pretty error-free or pretty easy from a management standpoint. You don't want to run it during peak operation hours. Run it when you're kind of at a slack period, but it'll move the file for you without you worrying too much about it. Sven says aggravating failed logins would be an option. That would be an option. Aggravate it with a counter. That kind of requires persistence across audit records. That would have been easy to do if we were still writing audit trails to a memory queue. But if you're writing the audit to a table, it's just not as simple to do. So it's not something that we've looked at least not yet. If you're using something like Database Firewall and you're inline mode, you can control that type of risk there, where you can say, well, if I get 3 failed logins, just don't let it even get through the firewall to the database. But at the database level, really all we have is the audit records. Sven, I agree with you. That context auditing, I can't tell you how many times I had to go out and write triggers or secure application roles or something to gather in that context information, especially for eBusiness Suite, because you almost always want to know what form is doing something. So that's a really useful feature. Same thing with enterprise user security, global users. Lots of stuff I want to capture from that NetOrg person object class that's there by default, but there was no clean way to do it in audit.
On 19, where the recursive, is that more not going to audit all the recursive, like when it hits the sys objects?
That's exactly what happens. If you say to audit only top level, then that's what you're getting. You're not getting everything else. And by the way, we're backporting that one. That one is so popular. We've already got the patch for backporting to 12.2, and we are evaluating a backport to 18C now.
That's going to be great, because that generates tons of.
Well, I mean, the classic is gather statistics. I mean, I've seen databases where gather statistics will put a couple 100,000 records into the audit trail. And you got to manage that. And it's worthless. It has no security value to capture it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, even like you drop user, it hits like 15 records.
Sure. But what I'm particularly happy with, and I've said this to development guys, is I love the fact that instead of making it a global parameter, they did it as an option in the individual audit policy. Because sometimes that's what you want, but sometimes you really need that recursive SQL. That could be an indicator of attack. So having both is pretty powerful.
Yeah, going on your topic for today, putting conditions on the policies gets a little tricky, but definitely powerful.
And we're hoping, especially as we get the 19.1 version of Audit Vault out, we're going to give you a lot better interface for doing that type of work. We're still working on it, so I can't tell you exactly what it's going to look like, but right now it's a very command line oriented thing, and we can do better than that. So we'll have something good for you here towards the end of the year.
Yeah, I've learned that you had to go after the background processes and that Aura agent bin, and then when you're got the enterprise manager running, they just generate all kind of stuff, and to be able to filter them out.
So if you filter out DBS and MP when DBS and MP is coming from the OMS, because you don't want to always filter it out, it could be a bad guy using it, but you filter out DBS and MP where the IP address is one of the OMS IP addresses, and you completely ignore that.
Yeah.
See, Sven says, idea for the future, I have customers asking for value-based auditing, however, from an application. So set it up and read it. Ooh. I could do this now, set up value-based auditing and read it without DBA privileges. And the way that I would do that is to use trigger-based auditing. I could also do it using LogMiner. You don't have to have full DBA to use LogMiner. And what I might do for that is, remember we talked last month or the month before, we talked about privilege analysis, is I might create a user, give them DBA, let them go out and do the LogMiner session, and then see what privileges they use with privilege analysis and just revoke DBA and give them only what they used. That would be one way to get a minimally privileged user to do that type of analysis. And of course, if you're using Audit Vault and Firewall, you can have that, just pull it in, and then they don't even need to connect to your database at all.
Yeah, the Audit Vault is also good because it pulls in the user entitlements, and then you can go behind those to the back end and start querying the data to analyze stuff. That's been pretty helpful.
Yeah, kind of look at it. So the Audit Vault way of doing it is the traditional attestation approach to it. I want to report on what privileges a user has, and somebody certifies that what they have is appropriate. And what I really like about Audit Vault is the differential reporting. So once I do all the certification, I can say the next time, just show me what's changed, so I don't have to go through the whole list. Privilege analysis goes from the other direction. What did they actually use? Because they might have it. You might think, okay, it's all right that they have it, but if they're not using it, well, then they don't need it. Let's remove it. So really, the combination of the two lets you hit that from both directions. Sven, I can guarantee you, as we get closer towards the end of the year, you'll be hearing a lot more about the new capabilities in Audit Vault and what we're doing with Golden Gate.
Yeah, the Audit Vault also kind of helps you when you start analyzing the data on what kind of audits you got going on and do they make sense, and on what
Agreed.
accounts.
Agreed. If, one of the first things I do in almost any Audit Vault implementation is I've got a custom report that I upload, and this is more towards Firewall, but it kind of aggregates the information so that instead of having to look record by record, I just get counts. How many from this IP address, how many from that operating system user, and it really lets me fine tune stuff, what I'm going to capture a lot more. I'd love to see that get turned into a default report, but so far I haven't managed that.
Yeah, the aggregates and the trying to aggregate stuff is kind of a pain.
Yeah.
But yeah, I came across a session that was doing 770,000 connections in a day.
Whoa. Badly designed connection pool?
Oh yeah. My initial sizing got blown out of the water from 1 terabyte to like 13 terabytes.
That's a rough one.
I have one last one, and it's dealing with Key Vault.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we still don't have that one implemented. How important is it to have that HSM key attached to it, especially if I'm the one that's in there managing this? The DBAs are probably the ones that's going to be managing the Key Vault as it is.
So what the HSM integration gives you is it gives you protection against somebody physically stealing the Key Vault server. Because if I make off with the Key Vault server and that Key Vault server is integrated with an HSM, you can't start the Key Vault without giving the HSM key.
Okay, that's the only key.
That's a pretty low risk.
Yeah.
We built that in because a lot of our financial service customers, you're dealing with billions of dollars if somebody steals that Key Vault. So they go to that level of, okay, I worry about those kind of things. For most people, if someone's in your data center physically stealing stuff, you got a real problem.
True.
Let's see. Pat asked, any recommendations on how to store database passwords and wallets in the case of a catastrophic event that makes all the DBAs unavailable? Pat, our recommendation there is if you're beyond a small shop, you should be investing in a privileged account management tool. That privileged account management tool can be something as simple as a password safe, like a KeyPass or something. Those are free. Or they could be something as complex as a CyberArk or a Lieberman. The one I see most often in medium to large businesses right now is CyberArk. And I think CyberArk should give me a nickel for every time I say their name.